We've all heard the stories. Untouched jungle, green hell, a wilderness so hostile no real civilization could survive there. For 500 years, we dismissed the Amazon as empty forest dotted with a few scattered tribes. We were wrong. Beneath the canopy that stretches across 2 million square miles, cities lay hidden. Not ruins from some distant age. Cities that housed tens of thousands. Cities with streets that ran straight for miles. Cities that turned nutrient-dead soil into black earth so fertile it still grows crops today. Who built them? How did we miss them for so long? And what does it mean that everything we thought we knew about the Amazon was a lie? His accounts describe densely populated regions extending hundreds of miles along the water. Towns with palisade walls, plazas, agricultural systems that fed thousands. Back in Spain, nobody believes him. The Amazon can't support that many people. The soil is terrible, the jungle is too thick. Orellana must be lying or confused or suffering from fever dreams. So we build a story. The Amazon is pristine, untouched. A counterfeit paradise where the soil is so poor that only small bands of hunter-gatherers could ever survive. This becomes official history. Betty Meggers, a prominent archaeologist at the Smithsonian, champions this view through the 20th century. She argues the Amazon's environment is fundamentally hostile to civilization. Her book, Amazonia, Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise, becomes the standard text. The science is settled. The Amazon was always empty. He takes his 22-year-old son, Jack, and Jack's best friend, Raleigh Ramel. On April 20th, they depart from Cuiabá. They have 2 horses, 8 mules, 2 dogs, and 2 Brazilian laborers. May 29th, Fawcett sends his last letter from Dead Horse Camp. He writes to his wife that they're about to enter unexplored territory. The insects make bathing a matter of great haste. The season is good, but midday brings sheer misery. He tells her she need have no fear of failure. Then they walk into the jungle and disappear. The Royal Geographical Society declares them lost in January 1927. Search parties go out. Many don't come back. For decades, Fawcett becomes a cautionary tale. The man who chased a fantasy and died for it. His lost city of Z becomes shorthand for delusion. A geologist named William Denevan starts using aerial photographs to study the Amazon. He's not looking for cities. He's mapping agricultural systems. What he finds changes everything. Across the Llanos de Mojos region in Bolivia, he spots earthworks, raised fields, canals, mounds, patterns that extend for miles. These aren't natural formations. Someone built them. Someone organized labor on a massive scale. The myth starts to crack. 1977, a Brazilian researcher named Anandamar Dias flies over the state of Acre. Below the canopy, he spots geometric shapes carved into the earth, geoglyphs, circles and squares and rectangles, some over 1,000 feet across. They're only visible because deforestation has cleared the trees. Alciranzi continues the discovery. By the 2000s, researchers catalog over 450 geoglyphs across the western Amazon. These aren't random, they're engineered. They date between 1 CE and 1250 CE. The empty jungle was never empty. French archaeologist Stephen Rostaing has been working in the Upano Valley for 25 years. He knew there were hundreds of mounds. The lidar shows him there are thousands. 24, specifically Rostaing and colleagues' peer-reviewed study on urbanism in Amazonian Ecuador, and from Nature magazine's May 2022 publication on Casarabe culture settlements in Bolivia by Prumers and team from the German Archaeological Institute. These aren't pop science articles. These are the primary archaeological reports. Now back to the information. Over 6,000 earthen platforms arranged in geometric patterns across 300 square kilometers. Platforms that once supported homes and ceremonial buildings. The platforms cluster into at least 15 distinct settlements. 5 are large, 10 are smaller. Between them run roads, not trails. Roads, wide and straight. Some extend for tens of kilometers. Co-author Antoine Dorison describes the road network as very sophisticated. Everything is connected. The roads don't follow the natural contours of the valley. They're dug up to 5 meters deep in places and intersect at 90-degree angles. This isn't organic growth. It's urban planning. That's over a millennium of continuous urban life. The core area of Quilamope, one of the largest sites, covers an area comparable to Egypt's Giza Plateau. It's as large as the main avenue of Teotihuacan in Mexico. But unlike those stone monuments, everything here is earth. Platforms, plazas, terraces. The jungle ate the buildings when the people left, but the earthworks remain. Rectangular agricultural fields stretch between the platforms. Hillside terraces step down the slopes. Drainage ditches and canals crisscross the terrain. Excavations at 2 large sites, Sangay and Quilamope, find pottery decorated with paint and incised lines. Large jugs that once held chicha, the traditional maize beer, grinding stones, hearths, evidence of everyday life. Analysis of grains in the pottery reveals they ate maize, cassava, sweet potato. They grew these crops in the valley on land made fertile by volcanic ash from the nearby Sangay volcano. Whatever the number, this isn't a few villages, it's a civilization. Heiko Prumers from the German Archaeological Institute has been working there for over 20 years. When he started, the area was almost blank on the archaeological map. Swedish ethnographer Erland Nordenskjöld did early work in the region, followed by William Denevan and his student Clark Eriksson, but there was no chronology. Prumers built one using pottery, 5 distinct phases. The Kasarabe existed for 900 years. 2022, Prumers publishes LIDAR data in Nature. The scans reveal 2 massive settlements, Kotoka and Landivar. Kotoka covers 147 hectares. Landivar is even larger at 315 hectares. Around them, spread a 4-tiered settlement system spanning 4,500 square kilometers. Over 189 settlement mounds, conical pyramids up to 22 meters tall. Stepped platforms topped with U-shaped structures, rectangular platform mounds, civic and ceremonial architecture on a scale never before documented in Amazonia. Terraces rise 5 meters high and cover 22 hectares. That's 30 football pitches of raised agricultural land. At the center of Kotoka and Landivar sit defensive structures. Concentric moats and ramparts protect the urban cores. The pyramids and platforms are oriented to the north-northwest. Some researchers think this reflects a cosmological worldview. The architecture encodes beliefs about the universe. Michael Heckenberger, an anthropologist at the University of Florida, has studied Amazonian urbanism for nearly 2 decades. He says Llanos de Mojos is the clearest case of fully urbanized Amazonian landscape. Previous examples, like the Upper Xingu region in Brazil, show networked villages. Llanos de Mojos shows defined urban centers with smaller settlements positioned around them. It's suburban sprawl in the ancient Amazon. The causeways radiating from Kotoka and Landivar link to dozens of smaller sites. The network extends beyond what the eye can see. Only LIDAR reveals its full extent. The jungle reclaimed them. Within a century, the causeways and pyramids disappeared beneath vegetation so thick that even standing on top of a mound, you can't see the structure beneath your feet. Red or yellow earth with almost no organic content. Heavy rains leach nutrients away. Without fertilizer, crops fail within a few years. So how could ancient Amazonians feed cities? The soil is so valuable that locals mine it and sell it in markets as potting soil. For a long time, researchers debated its origin. Some thought it came from volcanic ashfall. Others suggested sediment from ancient lakes. The truth is simpler and more remarkable. People made it. It also contains pottery shards, fish and animal bones, organic matter from food waste, and human feces. Analysis shows the soil formed between 450 BCE and 950 CE at sites throughout the Amazon basin. Recent research published in Science Advances in 2023 proves indigenous Amazonians intentionally created it. Archaeologist Morgan Schmidt from the Federal University of Santa Catarina worked with the Quicuro people in southeastern Brazil. He sampled soil from 4 archaeological sites and 2 historic villages occupied from 1973 to 1983, plus 1 modern village, Quicuro II. Radiocarbon dating showed the oldest sample was 5,000 years old. Most range from 300 to 1,000 years old. The soil from residential areas contained more than double the organic carbon of peripheral soil. It was less acidic by 1 full pH unit. Chemical analysis found denser concentrations of phosphorus, potassium, and calcium near homes and plazas. The pattern matched in the modern village. The Quicuro are still creating dark earth today using traditional methods. They pile organic waste in middens. They add charcoal from cooking fires. They incorporate broken pottery. Over years, the waste transforms into fertile soil. Schmidt calculated about 4,500 tons of stored carbon at one archaeological site. The modern village had 110 tons stored in middens. Square kilometers. That's 3.2% of the total forest. Before Europeans arrived bringing conflict, exploitation, and infectious diseases that killed upward of 90% of the indigenous population, Amazonia teemed with human life. Population estimates range from 6 million to 10 million people. That's more than the population of Europe in the late 1400s. The ancient Amazonians took nutrient-poor soil and engineered fertility. They didn't just exploit their environment, they improved it. The charcoal in terra preta is stable. It binds minerals and nutrients. It doesn't break down. Some terra preta sites are over 2,000 years old and still fertile. Modern agronomists study it as a model for sustainable agriculture. Biochar, a modern version of terra preta, is being tested for carbon sequestration and soil improvement worldwide. The indigenous Amazonians discovered it millennia ago. You need leadership that can mobilize and sustain that workforce. The geometric layout of the settlements suggests central planning. The platforms are arranged around low square plazas. Streets connect neighborhoods within each settlement. The roads link settlements to each other and to agricultural fields. This is infrastructure. It's not accidental. Someone designed it. Fernando Mejia, archaeologist at the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador, describes the discovery as just the tip of the iceberg. The LIDAR surveyed 300 square kilometers. The Upano Valley is much larger, Researcher estimates suggest the mounds and platforms could extend over 2,000 square kilometers around the Upano, Pelora, and Pastaza rivers. Ecuadorian archaeologist Alden Yepes says the findings show political, economic, and religious organization typical of great civilizations. The old idea that the Amazon was an unpopulated space inhabited only by nomads is dismissed. Brazil nuts show almost no genetic variation across vast distances, suggesting human transport. 85 tree species used for food or construction by pre-Columbian inhabitants have been identified. 20 of them are abundant across the entire Amazon basin. That's 5 times higher than would occur naturally. The forest itself is partially domesticated. Indigenous peoples shaped it over millennia, propagating useful species, creating orchards and groves. Carolina Levis, from the Brazilian National Institute for Amazon Research, led a study published in Science showing domesticated trees are more abundant near archaeological sites. The closer you get to where people lived, the more the forest reflects human management. When he traversed the Amazon in 1542, he saw what was there: populous communities, agricultural systems, sophisticated societies. But within a century, they were gone. European diseases tore through the indigenous population: smallpox, measles, typhus. The people had no immunity. Mortality rates in some areas exceeded 90%. Communities collapsed. Agricultural knowledge was lost. The jungle reclaimed the fields and cities. By the time later Europeans arrived, the landscape looked empty. It became easy to believe it had always been that way. Cuicugu, near the headwaters of the Xingu River, was discovered shortly after Fawcett's disappearance. Archaeologist Michael Heckenberger mapped it in the 2000s. It's a cluster of settlements with plazas, defensive ditches, and roads arranged in a pattern similar to Upano and Llanos de Mojos. Fawcett died searching for proof that the Amazon had been home to advanced civilizations. He was right. He just ran out of time. Now back to the second call to action. If you value this level of documented research, subscribe. Comment what city you're listening from. This research comes from multiple peer-reviewed sources, including Rostain's 2024 science publication titled Urbanism and Garden Urbanism in the Upano Valley of Amazonian Ecuador, Prumers' 2022 Nature article. LIDAR reveals pre-Hispanic low-density urbanism in the Bolivian Amazon, and Schmidt's 2023 Science Advances paper, Intentional Creation of Carbon-Rich Dark Earth Soils in the Amazon. These aren't secondary reports. These are the archaeologists who did the excavations, flew the LIDAR missions, and carbon dated the samples back to the cities. Llanos de Mojos spans, 4,500 square kilometers with 189 settlement mounds. Both predate major Mesoamerican urban centers. The classic Maya cities in Guatemala and Mexico flourished between 250 and 900 CE. The Upano settlements were already abandoned by then. They had been occupied for over a millennium. The Maya built in stone, the Amazonians built in earth. Stone survives. Earth gets swallowed by jungle. That's why we found the Maya first. We assumed if we couldn't see stone ruins, there was nothing to find. LIDAR forced us to look again. The technology strips away the canopy digitally. Laser pulses hit the ground and bounce back. Software processes millions of data points into high-resolution three-dimensional maps. Suddenly, mounds become visible. Roads appear. Plazas and platforms emerge from the forest floor. What took decades to map on foot now takes hours from a helicopter. The LIDAR revolution started in Mesoamerica. In 2012, researchers used it to map Maya cities in Belize and Guatemala. The scans revealed causeways, reservoirs, terraces, and house mounds that fieldwork had missed. In 2023, LIDAR uncovered the ancient Maya city of Ocumtun in Campeche State, Mexico. It has pyramids, palaces, and a ball court hidden under dense vegetation. The technology moved to South America in the 2010s. Ecuador funded the Upano Valley Survey in 2015. Bolivia followed with Llanos de Mojos scans. Brazil is conducting surveys across the Amazon basin. Each flight reveals more. The scans need ground verification, but the initial results are compelling. The Amazon forest is continental in scale. Even with generous budgets, it would take years and an extensive workforce to survey it from the ground. LIDAR scans vast areas in days. The technology is becoming cheaper. Early systems required manned aircraft. Now drones can carry LIDAR sensors. The first commercial systems appeared in the mid-1990s. Today, multiple companies offer LIDAR services. The cost has dropped enough that more surveys are planned. 70% of formerly forested land is now grazing land. 91% of land deforested since 1970 has been converted to livestock pasture. Mechanical agriculture spreads across the Llanos de Mojos region. Heiko Prumers says a pre-Columbian structure is destroyed every month. Mounds, canals, causeways. Once they're plowed under, they're gone. Archaeologists are racing deforestation. They're trying to map and document as much as possible before it disappears. The forest around settlements had higher biodiversity than untouched areas because humans propagated useful species. This challenges modern assumptions about conservation. We tend to think human activity always degrades ecosystems. The Amazon shows that's not inevitable. Indigenous management improved the forest for thousands of years. The catastrophic deforestation of the past 50 years isn't the result of human presence. It's the result of industrial extraction that ignores sustainable practices. Millions of people. And disease wiped them out. Their knowledge died with them. We're only beginning to recover it through archaeology. The people who lived there had complex societies with advanced engineering. They weren't passive inhabitants of nature. They shaped their world deliberately and skillfully. Recognizing that doesn't diminish the importance of conservation. It changes what conservation means. We're not protecting pristine wilderness. We're protecting a landscape that was co-created by humans and nature over thousands of years. The Spanish accounts from the 1500s describe what conquistadors saw: towns stretching for miles along the Amazon River, populations in the hundreds of thousands, agricultural fields and orchards, canals and raised platforms. Francisco de Orellana reported women fighting alongside men in battle, which is where the name Amazon comes from, referencing the warrior women of Greek mythology. Other explorers left similar accounts. They described densely settled regions with sophisticated political organization. For centuries, historians dismissed these reports as exaggeration or fantasy. The jungle couldn't support those populations. The explorers must have been mistaken. Now we know they were accurate. The population estimates were real, the cities existed, the infrastructure was there. We just couldn't see it anymore because the forest had reclaimed it. Henry Walter Bates, a British naturalist who explored the Amazon from 1848 to 1859, wrote about indigenous pottery and earthworks. He noted that locals spoke of ancient peoples who had built the mounds. But he couldn't reconcile that with the prevailing theory that the Amazon was unsuitable for civilization. The cognitive dissonance persisted for over a century. Even as evidence accumulated, the dominant narrative held. Betty Meggers continued arguing for sparse, primitive populations well into the 1980s and 90s. Her influence was enormous. A generation of archaeologists was trained to believe the Amazon was marginal. Only persistent fieldwork and new technology finally overturned the myth. When he started working in Ecuador in 1996, fewer than 10 archaeologists focused on the Amazon. Everybody said there's nothing to find. Funding was scarce. The region was considered a backwater. The exciting archaeology was in the Andes, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. These countries are fascinated by their mountains and coasts, but not the Amazon, Rustain says. It's due to a colonial racist mentality that natives of the Amazon are savages incapable of building anything sophisticated. That prejudice shaped research priorities for decades. Even after discoveries started accumulating, skepticism lingered. Each new site had to fight for recognition. Each claim of urban complexity faced pushback. It maps what's there. When the Yupano Valley scans came back showing 6,000 platforms arranged in geometric patterns connected by roads, the data couldn't be ignored. When Llanos de Mojos revealed pyramids and causeways spanning 80 square miles, the evidence became overwhelming. The sheer scale forced a reckoning. Heiko Prumer's references an old Spanish proverb, "No one is so blind as the one who doesn't want to see." For centuries, we didn't want to see. The myth of the empty jungle was too convenient. It justified exploitation. It erased indigenous history. LiDAR made invisibility impossible. Western archaeology is finally catching up to indigenous knowledge. Researchers are increasingly partnering with local communities. Morgan Schmidt worked with the Kwikuro for over 20 years before publishing his Terra Preta study. Co-author Takuwate Kwikuro contributed traditional knowledge about soil management. The paper acknowledges this isn't a Western discovery, it's validation of what indigenous peoples have practiced and remembered. Eduardo Neves, director of the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography at the University of São Paulo, leads the Amazonia Revelada project. The goal is to identify archaeological sites across the Amazon by combining state-of-the-art technology with traditional knowledge of forest peoples. In October 2024, his team announced the discovery of a lost colonial city in the Amazon. It's Portuguese, 18th century. It appeared on old maps, but its exact location was unknown. The forest reclaimed it after abandonment. LiDAR and ground surveys found the street layout and stone foundations. This settlement is more recent than the pre-Columbian cities, but it shows the pattern repeats. Built in the Amazon, abandoned for various reasons, vanish beneath vegetation, reappear centuries later when technology allows. Neves emphasizes the importance of registering sites to create layers of protection for indigenous territories. Many sites sit on lands currently occupied or claimed by indigenous communities. Documenting them as heritage sites strengthens legal protections against deforestation and development. It also corrects the historical record. For too long, the Amazon was portrayed as a frontier waiting to be developed. That narrative ignores the fact that it was developed thousands of years ago by people who lived there sustainably. The current destruction isn't development. It's erasure of what came before. That's from a study published in Nature Communications, covering fortified villages and earthworks spanning over 1,100 miles between 1200 and 1500 CE. The distribution suggests an interconnected advanced series of settlements. If you extrapolate those densities across the entire basin, the pre-Columbian population could have reached 8 to 10 million. That matches high-end estimates from other sources. It also explains why European diseases were so catastrophic. Large populations living in a close proximity are vulnerable to epidemic spread. Once smallpox and measles arrived, they ripped through communities faster than immunity could develop. Traditional agriculture collapsed as communities lost critical mass. Knowledge that had been passed down for generations disappeared with the elders who died. By the 1600s, when later explorers ventured inland, they found scattered groups living in small villages. The earthworks and terraces were already overgrown. Roads had vanished. The forest appeared primordial. It became easy to believe it had always been that way. The myth calcified. No single piece was enough. Together they built an overwhelming case. The settlements aren't as visually impressive as Mayan stone pyramids. They don't have the monumental architecture of Teotihuacan, but they represent a different kind of sophistication. They're engineered landscapes. Every aspect of the valley was modified to support urban life. Drainage, terraces, roads, platforms, plazas. It's comprehensive environmental management. The roads are dug, not paved. They're carved into the earth up to 5 meters deep. They run straight regardless of terrain. They intersect at right angles. This isn't following paths of least resistance. It's imposing geometric order on the landscape. Dorison suggests the roads may have served ceremonial purposes, processions, ritual movement between settlements. The straightness and angles indicate symbolic meaning beyond pure transportation. The roads connect the settlements into a coherent system. You can walk from one to another along engineered routes. That requires planning at a regional scale. It's evidence of political integration. These weren't independent villages. They were networked. Terraces on hillsides expand arable land and prevent erosion. Analysis of soil samples shows they grew diverse crops: maize, cassava, sweet potato, beans, squash, fruits from domesticated trees. The valley's location in the eastern foothills of the Andes gave it advantages. Volcanic ash from Sangay enriched the soil. Rivers provided water. The climate was suitable for year-round cultivation, but none of that happened automatically. The Quillamopi and Upano peoples engineered the landscape to maximize productivity. They didn't just farm, they terraformed. They dug canals to drain fields and channel water to reservoirs. The reservoirs stored water for the dry season. It's a complete hydrological system. Researchers estimate one settlement, Katoka, controlled an area of approximately 500 square kilometers. That's substantial political reach. The defensive moats and ramparts suggest competition. Not every community was friendly. The fortifications indicate conflict, which in turn implies territoriality and resource control. These are markers of complex societies. You need food to sustain workers. You need supervision. You need a reason people will participate. The Kasarabe had all of that. The pyramids aren't purely functional. They're statements, displays of power and collective capability. The U-shaped structures on top suggest ceremonial use. The orientation to the north-northwest indicates astronomical or cosmological significance. These societies had complex belief systems and the infrastructure to express them materially. The engineering matched the Andes. The agricultural innovation arguably surpassed both. Terra preta creation is a technological achievement with no clear parallel elsewhere in the ancient world. Charcoal-enriched soils exist in other regions, but the intentional sustained production of fertile earth on this scale is unique to the Amazon. Modern science is only now figuring out how it works at a chemical level. The ancient Amazonians discovered it through experimentation and passed the knowledge down for millennia. Mortality rates of 70 to 90% were common. Entire communities died before ever seeing a European. The social fabric unraveled. Agricultural systems collapsed. Knowledge was lost. By the time later explorers arrived, they found remnants. Small groups living in conditions far removed from the urban centers that had existed a century earlier. The difference was so stark that it seemed impossible they were related. Hence the myth. The Amazon couldn't support civilization. What we saw in the 1600s must have always been that way. We never considered that we were looking at the aftermath of catastrophe. But exploitation isn't the right word. It implies extraction. What they did was more like gardening on a continental scale. Controlled burns to manage undergrowth, selective planting of useful species, creation of fertile soil, modification of waterways. The line between wilderness and garden was blurred because the gardens looked wild to European eyes. We expected geometric fields. We got forests with unusually high densities of edible plants. We didn't recognize it as agriculture. It was just different from what we knew. Agroforestry integrates trees and crops, increasing yields and biodiversity. Intercropping reduces pest pressure and soil depletion. These aren't new techniques. They're ancient, tested by millennia of use. Modern research is validating what indigenous Amazonians knew. Inspiration. But the point isn't to perfectly recreate it. The dark earths made by indigenous Amazonians contained fish residues, manure, and ceramics. Biochar focuses on charcoal amendment for carbon sequestration and soil improvement. The technique involves pyrolysis, charring waste vegetation at low temperatures in an environment with little oxygen. If you starve wood of oxygen, you can't oxidize it to carbon dioxide and water. You leave carbon behind. That carbon, when mixed into soil, binds nutrients and water. It creates habitat for microorganisms, it improves structure, and it's stable. Biochar can remain in soil for thousands of years. If scaled globally, it could sequester significant amounts of atmospheric carbon while boosting agricultural productivity. The indigenous Amazonians discovered this without knowing the chemistry. They observed results and refined methods over generations. We're reverse engineering their work with modern science. In Guatemala, LiDAR uncovered hundreds of ancient interconnected Maya cities, towns, and villages, plus a 110-mile network of raised stone trails. The patterns repeat. Build in rainforest, abandon, disappear beneath vegetation, re-emerge centuries later when technology allows. The difference is the Maya built in stone. Stone survives jungle better than earth. That's why we found Maya cities first. The Amazonian cities required newer technology to detect. Vinicius Parapato's estimate of 10,000 to 24,000 earthworks might be conservative. Each new LiDAR flight reveals sites nobody suspected. The forest is continental in scale. We've surveyed a tiny percentage. What's hidden beneath the rest? Costs are dropping. More governments are funding surveys. More data becomes available. The picture will continue to change. We're still in the early phase of understanding Amazonian urbanism. The first comprehensive LiDAR surveys only happened in the 2010s. It's been a decade. We're barely scratching the surface. The earthworks are fragile. Once the dirt is moved or compacted, the structure is gone. Pottery can be scattered or destroyed. Soil can be contaminated. The archaeological record is finite. Each site that disappears narrows what we can learn. Researchers are trying to document as fast as possible, but they're fighting a losing battle. Cattle ranching and agriculture are expanding faster than surveys can map. The Brazilian government under recent administrations weakened environmental protections. Deforestation spiked. Illegal logging and land clearing accelerated. Sites in previously protected areas are now vulnerable. That's why projects like Amazonia Revelada emphasize partnering with indigenous peoples. It's not just good ethics, it's practical conservation. Indigenous territories have lower deforestation rates than surrounding areas. The people who live there have incentive to protect the land. Documenting sites as heritage strengthens their legal standing. It provides additional arguments against development. It also corrects historical injustice. For centuries, indigenous Amazonians were dismissed as primitive. Now we're recognizing they built civilizations that rivaled any in the world. We can study terra preta to improve global agriculture. We can examine ancient water management to inform modern infrastructure. We can learn from agroforestry to make farming more resilient. We can recognize that human activity doesn't have to degrade ecosystems. It can enhance them if done thoughtfully over long periods. The Amazonian model shows this. The forest around settlements had higher diversity of useful species. Terra preta soils are more fertile than surrounding earth and remain so after thousands of years. The system worked. It sustained millions of people without destroying the resource base. That's worth understanding. Wrong about the sustainability? We built a myth of pristine wilderness and empty jungle and primitive tribes. Every piece of that myth has been shattered. The Amazon was heavily populated. The societies were sophisticated. The engineering was advanced. The environmental management was skillful. The agriculture was sustainable for millennia. Only disease and colonization destroyed it. The jungle reclaimed the cities in a century. We forgot they were ever there. For 500 years, we told ourselves the Amazon was always empty. LiDAR proved we were wrong. The timing coincides with initial Spanish contact in coastal Ecuador in the 1520s. The disease reached inland before the Spanish did. Smallpox spread ahead of direct contact. Communities died before they ever saw Europeans. This burial ground shows the moment of collapse. The cities didn't fail because the environment couldn't support them. They failed because epidemic disease destroyed the population. Within a generation, the Upano Valley was abandoned. The survivors left. The jungle grew over the platforms and roads. The mounds remained but were swallowed by trees. When later researchers arrived, they saw empty forest and concluded it had always been empty. They never looked for the bones that told the real story: disease, collapse, disappearance. The cities beneath the Amazon weren't lost, they were killed. Everything we thought we knew was built on absence of evidence. Now the evidence is emerging. The story is being rewritten with every LiDAR flight, every excavation, every radiocarbon date. The Amazon had cities. They were vast. They endured for over 1,000 years. Then they vanished almost overnight. Not because they failed, because we brought plague.